Thank you for coming today. First of all, I'd like to recognize a couple important people, like long-term councilman John Sharkey back here. Yeah. Say hello to John. Hi, John. And also, we have probably the longest-serving school board member in the county, Steve Stocks, right here in front. Yay! I think it was like, what, 30 years or something? Really? 60 years as an employee of the Oxnard Union High School District. That's good. Frank and Sue Nauman are here. Frank is a part of the Distinguished Speaker Series. It's a very interesting talk about his family's farming. And Security Bob.
He has his own...
Oh, yes. Nauman has his own storyboards. Yes, sir.
I want to say something. Steve Stocks was at Oxnard High School in the 60s when Sue and I were both students.
Was he assistant principal at that time? Cut your deals?
He was my biology teacher.
Oh, really?
Back when those things. Well, so today we're honored, and I live in Hueneme, and I've always been fascinated by the Indians and the Chumash. And coming here to Hueneme, and we've always heard these stories about the launching point and the canoes, and the Chumash Indians stroke their canoes out there. And it's a perfect place when you look at some of these photos and you look at this area before there was a harbor. You can kind of visualize the Indians camping out there and getting ready to launch their canoes. So, Dr. Colleen Delaney is here to share with us her extensive knowledge on the Chumash Indians and how they not colonized, you'll straighten out my education, but we certainly know that they were on the islands, and to get to the islands they had to come back and forth. And you know, there's so much, like I go to Hawaii a lot. When you go to Hawaii, you see the same symbolisms that you see back over here, and there's talk like, is it related? How do they do this? How do they know each other? But anyways, hopefully, I have a lot of questions, and hopefully your presentation will teach me something that I can be a little more knowledgeable. So with that, please welcome Dr. Colleen Delaney. She is a professor with the California State University Channel Islands, which is a lovely place as well. And it's funny, they chose the dolphins as their thing. So. Anyways, please welcome her.
Speakers. I hate these speakers that are here with me. Yeah.
I like your voice.
Okay, thank you. All right, so thanks for having me here. You'll never know that I was born and spent half of my childhood in Texas because I speak very quickly and I tend to not enunciate. So normally I say shut up, but I'm amplified. So, but if I'm not enunciating and I'm not clear, raise your hand. Slow down. What I was telling my students. So, but especially when I get excited talking about stuff. Talk fast. But actually, yes, I'm talking about 13,000 years of humans out on Santa Rosa, including the historic period. So our most recent project at Channel Islands is we're working with the National Park out there. So yeah, I'm excited to share my knowledge and information. Great, am I going to get this to work though? Okay, so very briefly, I'm going to outline it, but then of course talk about it all, spending the next hour talking about this. So humans have been out there for more than 13,000 years. And so their descendants were the Chumash, and they were out there until the mid-1820s. Then there was a brief period of hiatus of regular occupation until it was turned over to sheep ranching and cattle ranching with the Carrillo family, and then the Moore family, and then finally Vail and Vicker Corporation right in the early 20th century. And then finally they sold the island to the National Park Service right in the 1980s, but they had a land use, special use permit out there, and so it was officially turned over to the Park Service in 2011. Right, so lots and lots of history. And then of course, related to that, there's sea mammal hunting, abalone fishermen, the Navy, the military, the Army, Air Force, they've all been out there. There's, bootleggers out there and stuff like that. So very interesting history out here in the Channel Islands. All right, so to orient you guys, right there, hopefully you all know, there are 8 Channel Islands. There's the 4 northern ones, Anacapas, Santa Cruz, Santa Rosa, San Miguel, and then the southern ones. The national park is made up of the 4 northern ones as well as Santa Barbara Island, right? And the Navy controls San Clemente and San Nicolas, right? And we all know about Catalina, right? Yeah.
Is Santa Cruz island in comparison to Hawaiian Island? How big or small is it? So I've always tried to figure that out. It seems to be very big when you see it.
Well, it's big, but it's not. It's 23 miles long
23 miles.
and 5 miles wide, right, to the point. So, but of the Channel Islands, it's the largest, right, and it's the most diverse. It's got a nice earthquake fault right into the middle of it, so we've got the interior valley and stuff like that.
22 by 5.
Yeah, so, yeah, so Santa Cruz and then Santa Rosa are the, so, and I'm not even going to try that. Sorry, I have to point over here. Okay, so what made the islands, right, so attractive to humans when they're coming out there? And a lot of that has to do with the sea currents here. We have the cold water, we have the eddies, we have cold water and warm water coming together, which you have different marine life, right, plant and animal life that does better in warmer versus cold water. So we're actually here at the Channel Islands, we're at the meeting point of these two areas. So we have a very diverse group. Then you have the upwelling, right? We have these deep sea marine canyons and the upwelling comes up. So it's a very attractive place for the different sea life. So year round, if you were out here, right, you have access to shellfish, fish, right, sea mammals, and then dolphins are here residentially. And then migratory, then you have certain birds that come through as well as certain cetaceans and certain whales that come through on a seasonal basis. But then with climate change, right, sea temperatures change, and so then you'll get different species that come in because they prefer warm water and certain ones come out. And so we can chart that also archaeologically, right, the shift for that. Compared to the mainland, the islands don't have, they're not rich in terrestrial resources, but Santa Cruz in particular has a good variety for being islands. So there are some species of oak, there are some pines, there's some edible plants with berries and roots, such as lemonade berry. I don't know if any of you guys have had lemonade berry. It has the sticky, this one here. It's really sticky and it tastes a little bit like pine pitch, but if you suck on it, it actually has a lemony taste. It's got vitamin C. So you can actually put it in water and make lemonade. And my favorite are the diclostema, which I always get giggles with my students when I call them blue dicks, because that's what they're known as. And they taste really yummy, except I don't like them raw because they have a water chestnut texture, but they're really good roasted. And so we find pit features out on the islands and elsewhere, where it looks like the islanders in particular are focusing on plants such as the blue dicks because they don't have the carbohydrate plants that you have on the mainland. So you have oaks, but not a lot of them. But so compared to the mainland, not as diverse, but still a lot of plants and animals out there that folks would be able to consume, right, to survive. And then so related to that, a variety of resources. So sandy beaches, rocky beaches. There's the interior valley of Santa Cruz, right, with fresh water. So fresh water is difficult on Anacapa and Santa Barbara Islands, but much easier to find on the bigger islands. But also through time, there were droughts. There was also times when it would be difficult to find water. And we see that again archaeologically, where they're placing their settlements. Next one. Oh, sorry. So archaeologists love the Channel Islands, right? In many ways, I really wish I worked out there. I don't work out there regularly. I do historic archaeology, but not prehistoric. There are no burrowing animals out on the islands. It is awesome, right? Because I hate gophers with a passion, because they churn everything up, right? And even now, the Navy's screwed up, and they brought earthworms out to San Clemente Island. It's like for road fill. It's like there didn't used to be earthworms. So even earthworms churn up the soil, right? But so out on the islands, we have these deep deposits where nothing has actually burrowed through. And that's really important for archaeology because we need everything in clean layers, right? Otherwise they get mixed up. And you go, well, this date's 13,000, this date's 5,000, but I don't know, how they're related to each other and stuff like that. So, yeah.
It's getting a little bit too.
Okay. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Talk to me. Yeah, I'm moving on. All right, let's read the slides. So humans have been out there for a very long time. So in a minute, I'm now switching to colonization, and then I'm going to talk a little bit on the in-between time, and then focus on the Chumash, right? Because that's what a lot of people know. And then much of this information I'm talking about comes from ethnohistoric and ethnographic accounts, right? Interviews and recordings of the Spanish recorded from the Chumash and the Kamba, Gabrielino, down in LA. All of us in this room, I can say that looking around the room, we learned in school that the first humans came to the New World across the Bering Land Bridge, right? Across from Alaska. But there's been a few other ideas that have been put forth. There's the Pacific Coast Kelp Highway idea. There's the Pacific Crossing through the South Pacific, and the Atlantic Crossing from the Spanish Solutrian theory. I'll tell you right now, South Pacific and the Atlantic, unlikely. Now, it could have happened that people came that way, but no evidence of a large-scale human migration into the New World. And we do have chicken bones and sweet potatoes or yams in South America and Asia. So there was clearly contact across the South Pacific to South America, but we don't think of this early time frame, right? And so with the Bering Land Bridge, what was so unique about that, what was so important, was the Clovis. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Clovis points. This is this very distinctive spear point used for hunting mammoth, right, mastodon. And so originally archaeologists thought this was the first time we found evidence of humans hunting mammoth, right? They found stone tools intermingled with the bones. And so they thought these early migrants were big game hunters and they brought their Clovis points. But actually now we have found stone tools that are older than these, right? So on the one hand, Clovis has been kind of thrown out the window. But I still love Clovis because Clovis actually represents probably the first American invention, right? This was the first stone tool type that was invented here in what became the Americas. So we'll give a little credit.
So when did they think where are they dated to? Where are they dated to?
Clovis, put me on the spot. Clovis is slightly younger, dates to, I think, 10 and 11,000 years ago. So again, most people, right, we learned coming through here, right, thinking, oh, it's a walk through the park across here and down through between the glaciers. It wasn't really a walk in the park. Right? Alaska was really, marshy and rivers and wouldn't go that way. But the latest thing that's really, come forward in the last 15 years is down the Pacific coast, right? And so the idea originally was it's tough to live at the sea, right? It's tough to know the currents and the winds and what, when can you eat shellfish and not get poisoned, and that kind of thing. So we thought the big game hunters were first, and then as populations grew and areas got crowded, people then focused on, well, okay, I'm living here, how can I eat? And then they shifted to the ocean. They thought it was they weren't smart enough to live on the ocean. But now we're seeing it's the opposite. They came down the ocean first. And we know this because the oldest dates here in California are Santa Rosa, and then the oldest dates in Mana and down in Chile are the same date. 14,000 years ago. The only way somebody's going to get down to Chile that quickly is by boat. So if you were a student, I'd be answering the phone right now. But that's what I tell my students. Yeah, and they answer mine. It happened once. It was my sister. Class was about to start. I'm like, oh. My sister, the professor, laughing, going, ha ha, she's got an info policy. All right, so how do we know sites? People were living here that long ago. There are shell middens. Shell midden is big. A midden is basically kitchen trash, right? So when you're throwing away your trash, all the stuff that decays, and plants decay, bones tend to decay, but shellfish, calcium carbonate, is very strong, and the stone tools. So that remains behind the best. So we get that. So we have shell middens that date before 10,000 BP. BP in archaeology terms stands for before present. Edward Libby earned the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for inventing radiocarbon dating in 1949. Radiocarbon dating then starts in 1950, which is really complicated. No, we can't do anything easy. So most archaeology dates are from radiocarbon years, so it's 10,000 years BP. Subtract 2,000 years, just round up to make it easy, and it's 8,000 BC, right? We tend to not use AD, BC, because it's a particular Christian calendar. There are other calendars out there. Why not use the Mayan one? Why not use the Jewish one, the Chinese one? So we try to fix it that way. Okay, all right, so that's my brief little intro to archaeology spot there. All right, so technological, so we're finding stone tools that are date pre-Clovis, right? So that tells us things are older. Again, the oldest human remains are out on Santa Rosa, Arlington Springs man. And then you look at the linguistic and the genetic diversity among the Chumash and other groups, and they really seem to be isolates. So linguistically, Chumash doesn't relate to anything in California, right? Except the Haida up in the northwest coast, right? And then genetically, we don't match, the Chumash don't match anybody except two other groups up in Northern California, Northwest. So this suggests actually they're probably a early population that became isolated, right? And later groups came in with more genetic diversity and with different linguistics, different languages. Yeah, so Chumash have been out here for
Are you saying Northwest Coast?
Sorry, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, sorry. Thank you, yeah. You teach the stuff so you forget, right?
Really quick, get that concept. You said the Chumash were an isolated tribe here?
Yeah, so probably what happened is, originally there were a lot of people, right?
Where?
Here, throughout the area. People were coming down the coast,
Yeah.
and some were continuing on, and some were stopping. Yeah, so they probably hit So they'd stay in an area,
Right.
and they're like, oh, wait, population's too big. So then a subgroup, the kids would then take a boat and they'd move further down the coast, right? Right. And so over time, over a few thousand years, the coast is going to fill up,
Right.
right? But we have pretty clear evidence of multiple migrations into the New World, right? Or over time, the folks in Kansas and Colorado are isolated from here, right? So over 5,000 years, they're going to develop a new language, and then those populations move, right?
Right. But you're saying the Chumash are not a part of this migration? I don't,
Well, because the Chumash didn't exist 13,000 years ago. So 13,000 years ago, you had a pre-Chumash population, right? And because they stayed in place for 13,000 years, they developed their own unique language and culture. Does that make sense?
And that became the Chumash.
Yes, yes.
And then genetically, when you talk about genetic markers, how does that even come into being?
Yeah, I don't do genetics. I read the papers that say that there's stuff. But yeah, they did studies with folks that I knew in northern Japan, right, in Siberia, with different groups. So there are these particular genetic markers, right, that.
So basically, a whole bunch of people came down the coast, but then some stuck in the islands.
Yeah.
And because they stuck in the islands, they developed their own genetics, while the other ones were continually, more and more people were coming, so they're interbreeding and stuff like that in different combinations.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Do they do any DNA stuff now on the bones or anything to see where they come from?
It depends. Some tribes are amenable to genetic testing and others don't want any type of destructive, because unfortunately to do DNA testing you do have to do some destruction. Usually though, the preference is just for a tooth or a finger bone, but yeah. So
Okay,
it
I thought
varies.
with the new technology that might, assist them figure out.
Yes,
where-
so that's again why it depends on the particular group, right, whether or not they're going to do that.
So all these groups that are the Chumash is amongst, that populated the area, they all derive from Asia though originally, right? Is that a fair statement?
That's what it looks like, yeah. Yes.
Evidence that, there wasn't an ocean, it was all naturally lit. In other words, that wasn't an island.
No, not,
It was
oh,
part of,
no, the islands have never been attached to the mainland.
no?
That was, we'll talk about that in a minute. Good question. They were shallow, but it was 4 to 5 miles away.
Yeah, I heard that during the Ice Age, the sea level was down 300 and some feet.
Yes, exactly. I'm not going to show a picture.
And they
Just
were
a minute.
saying that little pygmy mammoths, they transitioned back and forth from the coast.
Yep.
That's why
Do you know how they came about calling themselves Chumash?
Chumash is a name the mainlanders called the folks out on the islands. Nick Chumash, which meant makers of shell bead money. Nick Chumash, makers of shell bead money, which we're going to get to. You guys ask great questions. You're jumping ahead. All right, so for archaeologists, how can we find a site, right? So this is how we do it, because these are limpets, right? And so we process them. This is all you get, right? This is the meat left over. So what happens is the shell gets discarded, right? And in some places out on the islands like this one, there's been wind and deflation and all the stuff is packed together, so you can't really tell time period. This is a better one. This is out in Santa Cruz. I love this picture. The articulated dolphin vertebrae. And these are wavy top. Wavy top is a snail that only lives in the subtidal. So the only way to get wavy top is to dive. You have to actually dive for them, right? And dolphins, they would have hunted. Although this particular place, we think they did it similar to what's going on in Japan, where they drive the dolphins into coves and then kill them from the mainland. So even though the Chumash today say that the dolphins are their brothers, right, they're humans that got turned into dolphins, 8,000 years ago, they're eating dolphins. Because they weren't Chumash at that point, right? It was a different culture. So, all right, so let's jump to Santa Rosa, right? Arlington Springs on the north coast, right? Oldest human remains, 13,100 years old. And adjacent, not adjacent, but close to that was a midden, a buried midden, dates to 12,900. So pretty clear evidence, because a midden, you only can find a midden archaeologically if somebody lived, a lot of people lived in that spot because of all the trash, or the same people went back again and again and again to the same place where the trash builds up, right? If they're only there for one time, you're not going to find it. But if they're there for 5 months, every couple of years, the trash builds up, and then we can see that archaeologically. Lobo Canyon, also on Santa Rosa Island. This is the native soil. It's reddish. This huge dark lens, that's all midden.
Wow.
Right? And all these little speckles, that's all shell and stone tools that are falling out of the midden. This midden dates to at least 10,000 years old, but more importantly for archaeologists, there's a cemetery at this location, dates to 9,800 years ago, which is amazing to get a cemetery that old, because the early colonists, and these guys, they're hunter-gatherers, they're moving around, right? You only get a skeleton if you're in place, right? Because if you're moving around, when Grandpa dies, you bury Grandpa where he died, and then you keep traveling. But if you actually have a cemetery, that means a lot of people are using that same place, either for year-round or the same place, like every spring, they're there for 5 months or something like that, right? So that's amazing that a cemetery is that old, that they're sedentary, because again, the belief was hunter-gatherers have to be mobile. Well, thanks to the ocean and the wonderful resources of the ocean, you don't have to be quite that mobile, right? You keep coming back to the same spots. So these are some of those pre-Clovis points. They're called paleocoastal points and crescents. So it's unique. You find these along the coast, and you also find the crescents in the interior and the old Pleistocene lakes that have all dried up. So some speculation is that the crescents are actually used with projectiles, and they don't puncture the birds because that would destroy the flesh, but they're going to shock them, right, and give them heart attacks so they die, and that way you got your birds. So, but these are the points that we're finding, and so these date between 8,000 and 13,000 years ago. Most of them date between 11 and 13,000 years old. Most of these we find on the island. We found very few of these on the mainland because people like to reuse the same places. So, plus sea levels have changed, so it can be varied. All right, so for the question earlier on sea level change. Oops, sorry, too quick. Okay. Yes, the islands used to be one landmass. So the dark blue line represents the sea level lowest point 20,000 years ago. So 20,000 years ago, right, it was one big island. They call it Santa Rosa. That went all the way out here, down here, right? And so through time, so 20,000 years, 14,000, sorry, 16, can't read, I don't have my glasses. Okay, 20, 16, 14,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, and then the brownish is today, right? So the islands used to all be connected, and which is, yeah, it's the dark brown. So that's good and bad, right? Good, lots more land mass. Bad for the archaeologists, because all the sites are now underwater, right? And so we do think that the mammoth swam out there, right? Because elephants can swim. There's questions about whether or not the fox and the skunk got out there on their own or by people. I don't think people are bringing skunks out there. So that's a clear case of and because you see it even with the mudslides and the storms, vegetation gets washed out to sea. So they could have easily made it out there. There's been sorry.
Is Anacapa okay?
Yeah, Anacapa's over here.
Oh.
Yeah, so at the lowest point, it was still 4 to 5 miles to the mainland, right? So the islands were never attached.
And how deep was the water 20,000 years ago between the island and the mainland?
I don't know. But it was, the sea level's down 300 vertical feet, and so it just depends what part of the coast you're at. So I don't know how deep the channel is right now. Anybody know how deep the channel is? I know there's a big drop off right where the oil platforms are, right? No.
We've got a chart back there.
Yeah, check. We'll look it up later. Oh wait.
Are we talking Ice Age stuff?
Yeah, this is 12. So here we go. Come on. This is negative. It just says 300 feet, 200 feet. So I just don't know what the remaining depth is for that. Okay, so you're a human, you're coming out to a new location, whether it's the mainland or the island, and there's all these decision-making, ideas that go through your brain. What are you going after? What's your prey choice, right? So you're fishing, are you gathering shellfish, are you hunting dolphin, right? So then what patch are you choosing? Because you can't necessarily use it all. So are you going to focus on the kelp, right? Or are you going to focus on the intertidal? For the humans, what's the travel and the transportation costs? Do you want to have your settlement close to the freshwater spring, or do you want to be close to the ocean where you can easily gather the material, but there's no fresh water, right? So this is when we're finding archaeological sites, or we're trying to find archaeological sites, we have to try to put our brains into what they were thinking, right? Are there any safety concerns? It's really interesting. At a particular time period, the sites aren't, they're all up on high spots where you can see the ocean, right? right? So are they worried about people? Are they looking out for, right, sea life, right? What's going on? Right. And out on the islands in particular, they have a choice. They can choose the marine resources, the terrestrial resources, or the littoral, right, the shore. So, out on the sites, out on the islands now. On Santa Rosa, we estimate there are 8,000 archaeological sites. We have only recorded 700 and something, right? And at the European contact, Santa Rosa had 8 named villages. So there were 8 place names. So the one thing I'll give the Spanish credit for, they like to record things. So they always recorded where people, the Baptists, these people being baptized, where they were born, where were their parents born, right? Keeping track of that. So many of these estimated originally 8,000 sites we've lost, right? They're either lost to erosion, they're under the ocean, they're under the sea. Yeah.
Didn't the church really had a big campaign to try and baptize the Chumash Indians? I remember that there was some records that were discovered as a result of the baptism.
Yeah, I mean, that was it, but most of it was forced baptism. Or some of it, originally a lot of the native groups, they're hedging their bets. They're like, okay, we'll send a couple of the kids to the mission because they've got access to food, right?
Yeah.
People do that around the world, right? Yeah. So, so lots of sites have been lost to erosion or they're covered. Santa Rosa, Arlington Springs, man, was found 11 meters down below the surface of the earth, right? Because it was in the canyon, eroding out, 37 feet, right?
Oh.
So a site that's 13,000 years old is down 37 feet. How do you find that, right? Unless you've got erosion. But it's really complex because some sites have been used lots of times, and other sites. I've been working out on Santa Rosa since 2013. Summer of 16, we found a brand new site within walking distance of the ranch. National Park people have been walking by that spot for 25 years and nobody had found it. And that's because of the rough winds, storms the winter before caused erosion and brought up some of the material. And then you guys hopefully all heard about the Vail Ranch findings last summer. The ranch house was built right on the ground, so they were raising it up to put in a foundation. Paleo crescents, paleo darts, right, in situ, in the ground, right underneath the ranch house, right? And so that makes it really complicated because humans like to reuse the same place, right? So.
Did you say you found a great site? You said that's the thing.
No, they found those paleo-coastal points. They found those 12,000-year-old the stone tools.
Oh,
right.
That's what you said, National Park had been walking by.
No, so yeah, we found a brand new site. It's probably
Oh.
Chumash period, and it's probably 2,000 to 3,000 years old.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, we've been walking by it for years and nobody found it. Okay? So erosion. So the artifacts were on the surface, but the point is the artifacts hadn't been there for 25 years. Somebody would have found it by then.
What kind of artifacts?
They found some brownstone, we found some shells, including some olivella shell that had been broken up for bead making. So they were making beads right there.
Did they prepare the graves at all for any kind of, did they wrap them up or anything, or were they just pretty much just throw them in the ground?
No. Buried with grave goods, and the Chumash, so by contact, they actually had grave diggers. The Chumash had part-time specialization, and they would have people who specialized. That was their job, was to dig graves. And the more you gave them, the deeper they buried. Right? So that shows status as well in archaeology. If you have the money to pay somebody to bury your loved one deeper, then that means you were wealthier. So the types of sites out there, we have village sites. They're using caves. We have temporary ones where they're just saying, hey, this is the time of the year that the dolphins come through or whatever, and we're going to go get them. So some of the sites we're finding seem to be they're only there to process shellfish. It's close to the coast, they're getting shellfish, they're breaking it up, and then they're leaving. It's like so maybe they're breaking up the abalone. Quarries, there's some spots where they're clearly getting chert. Chert is a type of flint, right? So it's a very hard stone tool. Stone used for tool making. And then cemeteries. Cemeteries are considered special activity sites. So a little bit of everything. Okay, so that's the Pleistocene. Pleistocene, they're hunter-gatherers, but they seem to have liked this. They're coming down the coast, and so some of them said, hey, it's pretty cool, we like it here, we're gonna stay, right? And let us keep moving, all right? And so, again, we don't have a lot of evidence for these early sites because, sea level change, that sort of thing. But we do know there's 2 chert quarries on San Miguel and Santa Rosa, that it's the same chert that's used to make those early points, the paleocoastal points. We have a midden on San Miguel that actually has cordage for making a fishing line, and that dates to 12,000 years ago. And we're finding the paleocoastal points of presence. From 10,500 to 8,500 years ago, we're seeing a shift in site location from what we can find, and they're near springs. And so what we think is going on here is the climate has changed, it's gotten drier, and so they're moving their locations back to places where they know there's reliable water, right? And then they're going further to get to the ocean to get the resources. Focusing on shellfish, but we don't find a lot of vertebrate. We don't find a lot of, and of course, obviously out there, I don't think I've mentioned, there's no deer, right? The largest mammals out there are the fox and the skunk, terrestrials. So, but what's really, again, interesting for us from an archaeological perspective is that at this time period, they are truly maritime. They are focused on a maritime. They're going for the shellfish. They're going for the fish. But unfortunately, just like the early focus for archaeology was always like man the hunter, because there's all this stone tool evidence for hunting, and then people forget about gathering, right? But we know ethnographically, the vast majority of human calorie intake comes from plants, right? But plants don't preserve well archaeologically. So we think they're eating plants. They must be eating plants, but we don't actually have the archaeological evidence that early. We're starting to get it now with phytolith analysis. Phytoliths are little silica in every plant cell. And so now we're using microscopes to find that, and so we're getting evidence of this early stuff. But for plants, unless it's charcoal, unless it's been modified into charcoal, carbonized, then it's really difficult to preserve, right, over 12,000 years. So I think they're eating plants, we just don't have evidence for it at this time period. And again, these are these paleocoastal points, presence, and the points.
So,
Yeah.
what do you speculate the crescents were used for? They look like knives to me.
Yeah, so some of, maybe a certain way for skinning, if they're going after birds and they're going after sea mammals. So this is another map showing sea levels, shorelines, and where these paleocoastal and present points are found. Right, so the darkest shoreline, this is the gray, is at 13,000 years ago. Right, so this is where you can see again cliffs and things like that. Right, there's some places where there's very little difference, right, between 13,000 years ago and today, and then others it's separated. And here's the mainland, right? So you can see the difference up there. So the mainland is. But what's interesting is the location, right? So the triangles are the paleocoastal points. The green are the presence, and the red, sorry, I failed. I usually don't do red and green on the same slide. I apologize if you are colorblind, but that's why actually I have different, I try to have different sizes. What's interesting is where we find them, right? Because of course we're finding them all along today's coastline. But look, there used to be more. Right? So we're missing out, right? So again, I just throw this out. This is why our interpretations of how they're living early on is skewed, because we're missing, right, all the sites. Okay. So between about 7,000 years, and here I put BCE, before Christian era, that's what we say instead of BC, and ACE, before Common Era and after Common Era. So this is the time period where Chumash culture is developing. Really, who you would call Chumash probably develops about 3,000 years ago. But this is the roots of it, right? So between 8,000 and 7,000 years ago, we're starting to get ornaments made out of shell, right? So they're using different types of shellfish to make ornaments. Scallops, they're punching holes in scallops. They're taking the spires off of olivella, purple olive. We're starting to get evidence for plant foods. So we're starting to get ground stone tools, mortars, so not mortars and pestles yet, sorry, but manos and metates are being used to process probably that. We do see some changes. People back then also weren't as good as they're just like us. So there used to be a flightless duck in California. Did you guys know that? Yeah, they're extinct. Because imagine, you have this big duck that's flightless, that's the size of a Canadian goose.
Like a turkey.
So they went extinct. So yeah, they did that. We see go through time, right? Because some of these shell mids, these sites are occupied again and again for 5,000 to 6,000 years. We're seeing the size of, abalones going from this to this to this, right? And have you ever seen mussel shell that big? I've seen mussel shell that big. Yeah, now they're, so we can see they're over-exploiting resources, right? So the shellfish size is going down. Flightless duck is gone. And then we get changes in use of shellfish. So red abalone and black abalone prefer different water temperatures. So there are periods of time where you get nothing but red abalone middens, and so that tells us also then that there was some sort of shift in the climate, whether it's global climate, right, or the local sea climate, right? In the mid-Holocene, so 7,000 to 5,000 years ago, they're really, even though they're still diversifying, they're intensifying their use of the intertidal. They're expanding their use of shellfish, right? We estimate a few hundred people on the larger islands, again, because climate has changed. There's less water during this time period, so you can't support larger populations out there. But we are, for the first time, seeing different sized sites. So we're seeing a larger site with a bigger midden, so it might be 100 square meters, 200 square meters. And then you have some sites that are, sorry, it's 3 feet to the meter. Sorry about that. Archaeologists, we always use metrics in prehistoric archaeology. So the question is it like a larger, and then in the summertime or whenever it starts getting dry, you split people off into smaller groups so you're not using as many resources? We're not quite sure.
Do you know the average age span, how long their lifespan was? All that good fish?
Yeah, no, unfortunately I don't. I think, I mean, usually in this state, it's usually global. At this point, usually men are doing good. They're making it to their 40s and 50s and 60s, and women, childbirth, pregnancy. Women, their average lifespan is usually much lower. So I tell my students, this is the one time I'm glad to be living at this time period with modern medicine. Yes. Okay. All right. So, but what we really see is an increase at this time in the use of abalone and wavy top. So they're really focusing on wavy top. So there's something going on either climatically or culturally. The great thing about wavy top is it's that nice little snail. So you can just dive in, right? Put them all in a basket and then hike inland 5 miles.
It's a snail?
Yeah, it's a marine snail.
Okay, that's
Okay.
gotta go.
So yeah, you got a handy little pocket. You just leave them in the shell and then, carry them with you and then eat your snack later. So, oops, wrong way, sorry. Okay. And then 5,000 to 1,000 years ago, warmer, wetter conditions, populations are expanding. We now have regular use of Anacapa and Santa Barbara Islands. We've seen it before, but a much more intensive use of inter-regional exchange. We're finding deer bone, obsidian, right? Obsidian, the closest sources of obsidian here are the Coso Range in Eastern California. Increased exploitation of acorns. We're starting to get mortars and pestles, right, used for processing acorns, and new technology. So during this time period, we're seeing new fishing points, new stem points, aka arrows, bows and arrows have been invented, and canoes, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But what's also interesting is earlier in time, this is when all the sites are elevated. If you've been to Scorpion Anchorage, right, the historic village of Swashio is down in the canyon on the coast. But at this time period, 5,000 years ago, they're actually up on the high areas.
Why?
Good question. Some people think it's because of safety and they're looking out. And then later on, so more recently, the last 1,000 years or so, then they're shifting to the coast. And we think that's because of the canoes. They need sandy beaches, right, for the canoes. All right, so the late Holocene, that's after 1,000 years ago. Very significant changes, but right at the start of that, we have extreme weather change. We had a huge drought, and then changing water temperatures, drought conditions. And we think that Chumash took the opportunity at this time, because of their extended networks, to really shift who did what, because this is the time period where we start getting part-time specialization and trade and intensive trade, which I'm going to now talk about that. So this is all setting the stage to Chumash, which gets us to the Chumash. All right. So the Chumash and the Tongva Gabrielino, right? So here in California, Native groups are also often called by the Mission, right? So the Mission San Gabriel, those are the Gabrielino, but they actually were multiple people from different linguistic groups and cultural groups that were forced in, at least for LA area. So they prefer, many of the coastal groups prefer Tongva. So FYI, anything with NGA, Topanga, Tohono, Cahuenga, that's Gabrielino Tongva, right? That's where that place name comes from. I love place names. I can talk about place names all day. But so both these groups, they're maritime. They're focused on fishing, shellfish gathering, sea mammal hunting. And for the folks who are on the mainland, they're hunting deer, they're hunting rabbits, right? They're intensively processing plants. They knew about agriculture, they knew about pottery, but why do it? Don't have to. A lot of folks aren't aware, but California was a completely man-altered, human-altered landscape. So even the Chumash who weren't agriculturalists, they're pruning the oak trees, they're burning the undergrowth, right? It's completely managed to help produce what they needed and wanted. And so they're even bringing acorns and oak trees out to the islands and things like that. So we call them complex hunter-gatherer fishers. And we do that because traditional hunter-gatherers are egalitarian. Everybody's equal, you share. Complex hunter-gatherers aren't like that, unfortunately. For better or for worse, they're like us. You've got upper class, lower class, right? Haves and have-nots, who's your dad, who's your mom, right? All that type of stuff comes into play. So at the time of European contact, they were a very, very diverse group. The Spanish loved the Chumash because they had a concept of currency, right? Large populations. The most missions founded in California were founded in Chumash territory, right? San Luis Obispo, La Purísima, Santa Ynez, Santa Barbara, San Buenaventura, right? And they chose this area because of the high population densities. And I love this. Where are the high population densities today in California? Basically the same locations, right? So that's San Joaquin Delta, right? And then along the coast, particularly Santa Barbara Channel. So we estimate 15 to 18,000 people lived in the Santa Barbara Channel area, right, at the time of European contact. And they lived in, the largest areas were large coastal villages. So Santa Barbara had 3 villages. So Montecito, Santa Barbara, and Goleta had 3 villages of at least 1,000 people, right? Not quite as big down here, right? We had Xixilap, which is Ventura, and Muwu, right? Muwu, right down the coast. But because of their shift to acorns, nobody, and I'll point out, nobody voluntarily eats acorns. You guys ever eaten acorn? Right? But they had a choice, right? So starting about 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, climate changed, and you had a drought, and you had high population densities. What do? You either let people starve to get populations down, or you pick a less favorable food source, and that's what they did. They picked acorns, right? But the good thing about acorns is that you can store them, right? And so you had, with food storage, you could get surpluses, and then you could trade things, right? And start doing stuff. So we had large scale, so this is a reconstruction of, I think, Santa Barbara, Stearns Wharf area, burning. So the Chumash would burn, right, the hinterlands. So, hereditary inequality. So the Chumash had hereditary chiefs. Right? Women could be chiefs, but primarily it was men. They were monogamous, but chiefs could be polygynous. And when they had multiple wives, where were the wives? They're set in different villages, right? Because you need that political contact and interaction with people. Because unlike us, we talk about them as the Chumash, but they were really politically distinct villages. Every village was distinct from each other politically, right? You have some alliances, but they shared a common culture and they shared a common economic system and a common religion. But otherwise, it's not like, here in Ventura County, we have to listen to Sacramento, right? They were independent of each other. So you want to have contacts. And if you're out on Santa Rosa and there's a drought, you're like, okay, I'm just going to go live with my cousin for a little bit, right? I'm going to go live with my sister. She moved to the mainland. I can go live with her family for a little bit, right? I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the Chumash rock art, right? They had an amazing ceremonial system. They had an on-top religious organization which you had to pay to get into, but it linked, again, villages. So you had different religious specialists in different villages. Muwu, I love Muwu. Sorry, I keep hitting that. Even though Muwu, down near Point Mugu, controlled the religious calendar from Malibu all the way up to Santa Barbara. So our tiny little corner here, that isn't really considered important as far as economics goes, we ruled, right, the religious aspect here in the area. So that's kind of cool. Right? And then regional exchange, which I'm going to talk about. So large scale, I mean, there are olivella shell beads from here that are found in Colorado, right? So we have large scale exchange. Craft specialists, so you had folks who focused on making shell beads. The tamal, the canoe took 6 months to make, right? And it was very limited who had the knowledge how to make that canoe. So occupational guilds. And what spurred this change to what does it mean to be Chumash? A couple of really big things. One is bows and arrows. For better or for worse, the invention of the bow and arrow, we don't know where it happened, but because it was instantaneous across the U.S. Like within 200, 300 years, everybody's using bows and arrows. Because you have to, right? Keeping up the Joneses. You don't want that arrow in your back. But it also reflects changes in hunting, right? Spears, you go after elk, you go after things that are out in the open. Bows and arrow allow you to go after deer, right? Because they like to hide. in the brush. But what really changed things was circular shell fish hook and the plank canoe, right? That really changed how people got along. So the shell fish hook, there's been some great studies looking at the strength. The preferred shell fish hook material was abalone. So they've done lots of tensile strength tests, and that's the strongest material you'd get. Right? And I had a student do a experimental archaeology thing where she took wild-caught fish, put them in a tank, and took a different fishing line with lure, and some with bait, and the circular shell fish hook that she made without bait, and they reacted faster to the abalone shell fish hook than they did to the other stuff. So the circular shell fish hook, you don't have to bait, right? So if you lose the bait, it's okay. And some other experiments have been done in the kelp forest. It doesn't get hooked on the kelp. So it's a better fishing implement. So we think they developed this shell fish hook, and they're now intensively fishing in the kelp forest. So that's pretty cool. But at the same time, they're using everything, right? We talk about exploitation. They're netting. They're netting sardine and shark in the wetlands, right? They're using harpoons. They're using fish gorges. Yeah.
You mentioned the cordage. What did they make the nets out of and the wrapping around them?
I'm not exact. It's probably eelgrass. I'm certain they use eelgrass for
Grass?
eelgrass. It's called eelgrass. It grows in the water. And they use milkweed for the canoes, right? So they're using different fibers. And then there's the plank canoe. You guys all familiar with the plank canoe?
No.
Okay. The plank canoe is an amazing technological innovation, right? So the early guys coming down the coast, they're probably using sea mammal hide boats. And at some point they shift to reed boats, like balsa canoes, like you see in Lake Titicaca and stuff like that. But the problem with those ones is they get waterlogged, so you can't use them for more than about 3 days or they sink, right? Not good. And they're still using balsa canoes, at the time of European contact, right? They're still making these other type of watercraft. But somebody, 1,500 years ago or so, developed the plank canoe. Some think there's a Hawaiian influence there. There's debate about that, so we're not going to go talk about that one. But what's technological interesting about them is there's not a lot of wood, right, for making boats down here. For the most part, they've used redwood. And Santa Rosa Island has been called Hueneme, and it's been means either, I've heard different sources, but either redwood or driftwood. Because California current coming down the coast, all those wonderful redwoods up north, where are they landed? They're landed on the islands, right? And so they plane them out, right? They turn them into planks. They sew them up. They seal them with pitch, right? With asphaltum, right? They estimate 1 mile of milkweed went into making one plank canoe, right?
What did they seal them with?
Milkweed.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, they use milkweed. And this is amazing because before it's like, you might get off the island once, right? If you live out on the islands, you might make it to the mainland once in your entire life, right? These are cargo ships. They're not super fast, right? But they can hold 12 to 20 people, and they could carry 2 tons of cargo.
How did they make those planks without steel?
Oh no, they used stone tools. I've seen pismo clams like this big that they turned into adzes, right, for planing down the wood. Yeah. And Fernando Librado, right, remembered people making them, so they made one. Right, there's in the Massachusetts. So cargo ships, right? And so Chumash are maritime culture, right? And the tamales are an important symbol for the Chumash. So in 2001, they rebuilt the tamal for the first time in 150 years. And they now have yearly crossings out to Schwachil, which is scorpion anchorage. Schwachil means a boat landing place. And so these are pictures. My colleague Jennifer Perry at Channel Islands happened to be out on the island working for the Park Service in 2001, so she took these photos when this was the first voyage back across. And these guys must have been so strong. They estimate the canoers can make it probably out 4 or 5 hours out to the island, and today it takes 11, 12 hours. Granted, they're switching crew, and they've got the Coast Guard ship there and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, and so intensive interregional exchange. So they're bringing deer meat, hides, bone, obsidian out to the islands, and in the islands they're shipping out stone tools, their otter skins, and then the shell beads. And for me, that's the most interesting because you can make the shell beads here on the mainland, right? It's just olivella shell, and you get a stone tool and you make the bead, although it's really difficult to make. But we estimate at the time of European contact, 90% of all shell beads money is being made out on the islands, right? So they reorganized. It's an economic system. They said, well, I could do that, but it'd be easier for me to make the bead and trade the bead for deer and baskets and all that kind of stuff. So really intensive trade back and forth. And then also including asphaltum, steatite from Catalina. Right, that's a big trade source. So, because soapstone, are you guys familiar with soapstone? Steatite? It's a calcium talc. Super soft, but it's heat, transfers heat. So basically this is a griddle, right? You can just put your pots right in the fire.
How big is it? What's the dimensions?
Oh, that one? Oh, that one's probably about that big, right? But it's a different size. So they use the steatite for beads, for sucking tubes, right? Yeah.
Did they ever carve little figures out of that
Yes.
soapstone?
Yeah.
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 So-
But the Chumash preferred really ambiguous figures. So sometimes you go to museums and you see these whales and spiders, and yeah, those are all fakes. There's a guy who was making them and salting the sites on the coast in the 1930s. Because you get paid for what you can produce for the museum. So, you know.
So, what, do you know what the hole is in that?
Yeah, that's a griddle. So you're putting a stick and you're pulling it off the fire.
Oh.
Burn your fingers. And they would make asphaltum. So asphaltum is used for glue, right? So asphaltum is used to, the tar is used to seal the boats. It's used to decorate stone tools with beads. Women apparently would take balls of asphaltum on their skirts so the winds wouldn't blow it up. But they used special formulas. So they would add pine pitch and other things depending on what they were trying to do. And one of my favorite artifacts I found is a steatite bowl covered in asphaltum on the inside, because to make these they had to heat it up. And I found just a flat stone about that big, but covered in asphaltum on the tips. That was a tar abrader. So it was probably, it's like, wow, that was probably used to make a plank canoe, right? They're spreading out the tar on it. Stuff like
What
that.
was the name of the material you said that?
This one is soapstone.
Soapstone.
The geology term is steatite or talc schist, but most people just call it soapstone.
So they're real soft.
Yeah, some people like to use it for kitchen counters, and, but it's soft. So the money bead, right? The Chumash made 30 different types of shell beads, but the money bead in particular was from the purple olive. You had to completely destroy the whole shell to get to one little spot right there. That's the callus. So you can make other types of beads, wall beads. You can make about 2 or 3 out of one shell, but to make the money bead, you had to break the whole shell. It was very labor intensive, and we do find counterfeit beads, right? So even back then, they're trying to counterfeit, and there was a crash in the economy when the Spanish brought steel needles, because the steel needles can drill much faster. And the Spanish learned that real quick, and we see the inventories where they brought, hundreds of packets of iron needles to trade, right? But the money bead, they had a particular length. So you'd take your hand, you take a string of beads, you wrap it around your hand a certain way, and everybody knew what that length meant. So it might have meant, a bushel of acorns, or 5 of those might have meant a deer hide, stuff like that. So that's why this was the money bead. That's why the Spanish liked them. Because, the Spanish would say, hey, here's some red beads, here's some white beads, help us build the mission, right? And they did, right? The Chumash in particular liked red and white, were very important colors for them. So we talked about craft specialization, so we shifted. The best evidence is actually from Santa Cruz. This is Santa Cruz, but you see this on the other islands as well. And because they had good sources of chert, right? There's whole sites out on the east end. The east end is nothing but one big chert quarry. And then the whole rest of the island, especially the west and the south, are sandy beaches. And so here we find, that's a flat piece of sandstone. You can see the holes, that's where they're drilling the shell, right? So they put the callus bead in there into the little hole cut, and then they drill down into it. And these are micro drills. So they had to make these teeny tiny drills to get the shells.
So the church were naturally, they always look like they were chips to me off
Right.
of a larger rock.
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yes, out here they're large outcrops. There are other places like in the Midwest where you get the chert precipitates out of limestone. So you get little balls. But out here they're big.
So they're natural or are they man-made?
The outcrops?
The church.
Yeah, they're natural. But humans have learned to exploit them. And earlier they're using them to make big stone tools, and then later in time we see when they're making the drills and stuff, they're actually going back to the old quarries and getting the detritus, the remnant pieces, because they're big enough that then they can then break down into smaller pieces. And then part of this whole interconnection is important, right? Again, for craft specialism and intermarriage. So what we see here, Ventura, Shishalap, and Muwu had marriages with Swashio. Swashio had marriages to this village right here, and these guys intermarried with folks in Santa Rosa. So this site right here is right there on Santa Cruz, right? And this is standing on Becker's Bay in Santa Rosa, and that's this, where am I? That village right there, right? So you see this interaction. And so this is how this regional exchange network works, right? You're intermarrying across it. I failed to mention, Chumash, again, it's just culturally and religiously similar, but the languages were pretty distinct. There were a minimum of 6 Chumashan languages, and island was unintelligible to the folks on the mainland, actually, which points to the antiquity. So even though it's in the Chumash language family, they couldn't understand each other. So the Chumash also had professional interpreters, which is another reason you want to intermarry between villages, right? Stuff like that. Okay, so at the time of the founding of the missions, Santa Rosa Island was called either Wima or Wimal. There were 8 recorded villages. Hishiman is near the current ranch, and then I cannot pronounce that. I'm not even going to try. Near Rancho Viejo, the old ranch. Some Chumash I can pronounce, others I can't. So, okay, all right. That's the Chumash. Now we're switching to the historic period. How am I on time? Am I doing okay? You guys good?
You're doing good.
Okay.
Go fast.
All right. So.
But you're already go fast.
Please, quick. All right, so sea otter hunting. All right, so there was this period of time where the Chumash, some of the documents just say, and the Chumash decided to leave the island. They've been decimated by disease, right? There was a big earthquake on Santa Cruz. At a certain point, you don't have enough people out there to survive. So they're like, okay, we're going to move to the mainland or go into the missions, things like that. All right, so the island was basically abandoned by permanent habitation. But you had people coming in and out. So you had sea otter hunting. The Russians, were up north, and they hired Americans as well as others, and they're hunting for sea otters. And they used both the Aleutian and Hawaiian crews, actually. And George Nidiver, are you guys familiar with George Nidiver? He's famous for rescuing the lone woman of San Nicolas. Oh. Yeah. But he actually technically couldn't hunt otter because he wasn't a citizen, but he contracted through William Dana, who is famous in Santa Barbara, right? And his crew, actually, I love this because this is one of the first evidence of multiculturalism, right? They had African American, they had one guy, O'Brien, he was like, gee, is he Irish, Native Hawaiians, and we're all on the crew. And they actually had an incident where they were attacked by a Northwest group, thinking Russians and Aleutians, and George Nidiver's group, they actually killed a couple of those guys. They were hiding out on the island. They found out later that ship was actually led by John Bancroft, who was running an unlicensed sea otter ship right through the Russians. So, but evidence of multiculturalism. And one of the places they hid out was Nidiver's Cave. This particular cave is now called Nidiver's Cave. Now it's much overgrown and we're desperate to excavate it. But because apparently it goes back, and they estimate you can fit over 100 people inside, right? So it's a small little entrance and it goes back.
So
And
there's a Nidifer Road up on 101 of Goleta.
oh, okay. That might be related to him because he lived in Santa Barbara for decades. He was in.
And is it Nidifer or Nidifer?
I don't know. I've heard both. So you pick one. All right. So now into more permanent occupations out there. Sheep ranching, the 1840s. Cattle ranching, in particular, starting in 1901. The deer and elk hunting, and then the various military activities. I'm going to quickly go through those.
So is that, go back to one, those buildings behind the pier there?
Yeah.
That's at Santa Rosa, that's.
Correct. That's Johnson's Lead. That was Johnson's Lead. They destroyed the buildings.
They destroyed them. When?
I knew somebody was going to ask that question. I don't know. I think the Park Service might have destroyed it.
Okay, and what were the buildings used for?
That was actually Air Force. So I think they were manning different radar and radio telecommunications. Right? Yeah.
Yep.
So, when you say cattle ranching from 1901 to 1998,
Yeah.
is that like, are you referring only to what the Indians were doing?
No. Yeah.
Because
We switched.
because around here, the Californios were doing it.
Right. Yes. Some of these are Californios. So starting in the 1840s, those are Californios.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
They were doing cattle ranching too.
Right. So one brief side note, because I love this particular story. I took students out to Santa Rosa on a trip, and I have what we call non-traditional student. He's in his early 60s. He's retired, going back to get his degree. And we're out on the island, and it's a class trip doing other stuff. But the kids are sitting around talking. And one of the students is like, yeah, for my senior thesis, I'm thinking of doing the military. And this guy Paul, he leans back and he goes, yeah, my dad was out here when I was born. And it was like, what? His dad was stationed at Johnson's Lee, and they set a PT vote out for him when his mom went into labor, and his dad was still alive, and the student got interviewed, and we went to the retirement home in Arizona to meet him. I was like, yay! So it's a small world, you never know who you're going to meet and what you're going to be able to do. All right, so just briefly, yeah, there were people who visited the islands, early on. So Cabrillo, and other folks. So I put that in, but I'm short on time, so I'm not going to talk about that. But to talk about, this is Arlington Springs and Lobo Canyon is up here. The main ranch is here at Becker's Bay. And then when I talk about Old Ranch Canyon, this is here. So the original California ranch was here. And then they moved it to here in the mid-1800s, and it's been there ever since, the main ranching out there. Okay, so the Carrillo family got a Mexican land grant right in 1843. Very quickly, Carrillo sold the interests in the island to his daughter's husbands. Which could be good, could be bad. This has happened frequently. Americans would marry into California families, right? And so they took it over. Their focus was on both sheep and cattle, and at this point in the 1800s, they are doing cattle for hides, right? The focus is not on beef at this point, but it's so sheep, it's for wool, right? And then hides. And they put their residence right over the Scotch sheep it's over there. That was that one. And so for archaeologists, there's not a lot left of this ranch, but we're searching for it because there are some old fence lines, right? And there has been some, in the past, it was latest, the 1960s, there were talk of, a building collapse. So the problem is when you live on an island and you don't have Home Depot to go visit, they tend to scavenge off of sites.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
When you say, I never thought about this, but you said that they're only doing sheep and cattle for the hides and for the, well, then what did they do with the carcasses?
Yeah, good question. I'm not sure. I thought about that. I mean, when you're killing 25,000 sheep because of drought, what do you do? So I think they're boiling stuff down, and they're doing lots of stuff. So because of legal issues and stuff, the island was then sold to the Moore family because there were spousal law disagreements. And so they took it over, and then they moved the ranching headquarters to 1870 to Becker's Bay, and they built two buildings. One is that burned down in 1969. The other one is the contemporary Vale Ranch House that everybody's familiar with. And their focus was on sheep, which, unfortunately, that's awful. And San Miguel, they estimate San Miguel Island had over 100,000 sheep on it. Do you know what 100,000 sheep does? It eats everything, it destroys everything. So unfortunately, they're focusing on sheep, and they're totally denuding the island. And they had, for example, the 1876 drought, they killed 25,000 sheep. They call them metazonats, when they just bring everything today, they kill them all, and to try to get the wool, right, to try to get some meat and stuff like that. Because otherwise, you're letting them starve. Because at that point, they estimated actually that there were, I think, about 45 to 50,000 sheep on the island. So they culled it down. But they really destroyed the environment out on Santa Rosa. Wrong way, sorry. Which gets us to Vale and Vickers. So it took when one of the last the head Moore guy died in the late 1890s, it went into probate, and slowly different parcels because of inheritance was bought up by the Vale family. And Vickers was a silent partner in that. But they were, considering that ranching is very bad for the environment, they were as good as stewards as you could be. They divided the island up into 7 to 8 pastures, and they moved the cattle around. They searched cattle, they dipped them, and they searched them for non-native plant species when they came onto the island, to do everything they could to try to restore the ecology, right? So they did really good management, and I really try to praise the Vales, right, when I'm in public. So from an archaeological perspective, we're looking for things like they have very distinctive fences. So this is a fence from 1900, so you can keep the cattle in, but you can actually get through, right? And this is an ear tag we just found. I know you can't read it. This is from a cow from Utah. Because what the Vales focused on was feed, right? This was before feedlots became really important. So people would ship young cattle out, and they'd leave them on the island for a year and a half to fatten up, and then they'd send them back to the mainland. And so that's why they actually had, as was mentioned, they actually had specially built ships where they would load the cattle up and bring them off. And sometimes they would load them in and they let them swim ashore and stuff like that. But over time, they had different stuff. And so this is a picture, I think, from the 1960s of the ranch.
So the deer tag, I mean, the cattle tag,
Yep.
is there a date, do you have a date on that?
I do not. But I think some of them you can't actually date, but because I think it's cattle being brought in from throughout the western U.S. to go out there and get fat off the thing. Right, so here's a picture of one of the cattle on the boat. I think it's from the 1930s.
That ain't even the 50s and the 60s when I was a kid. I was
Yeah, no,
watching
it happened as late as that, but I think this particular picture is from the 30s.
So they were coming into.
Sorry?
something.
I like to also talk about other things that happened out there. My favorite are the Coast Survey guys. God, those guys are amazing. They're out there in fog and stuff, and they are putting up points during, because the U.S., once California became part of the U.S., they needed to map the coastline, right? So ships wouldn't sink. And so we had these amazing maps from the 1850s and the 1870s where these guys are out here and they're mapping fence lines and structures and all this kind of stuff, right? And vegetation, what the vegetation is like. So this one is actually Becker's Bay. This is from the 1870s. They had a wharf. Here's the barn, right? Here's some fence lines, right? You also have the abalone, Chinese abalone fishermen who got permission by the owners. Some did, some didn't. And then crayfish fishing. That's my favorite. Crayfish are actually lobster. But in 1900s, 1930, they called them crayfish. And then, of course, the Army and the Air Force was out there. So the Army had a little base here in 1944. And that star from earlier, that was the flagpole. You can still see some of the foundation. And then Johnson's Lee. And then they promised the Vales that they would remove everything. But they couldn't because it was too expensive. So the bonus was not only did they leave things on the island, but they actually had to pay the Vales for damage to gear and stuff like that. And so the Vales would just use these as hardware stores. Yeah, so lots of fencing, sinks, a whole bunch of kitchen dishes and stuff are all were at the ranch house and stuff like that. It's a little. Then in 1986, and so there's been some hard feelings with the Vale family about this, but the truth, as I understand it, is come the 1980s. None of the Vale children wanted the island because it was a losing money proposition. They're losing $1 million a year. The kids didn't want to manage it. The Park Service said, hey, we'll take it. So they entered into a deal which was passed in 1986. And they had 5-year incremental leases. The issue, and the Park Service agreed the cattle could stay out. They said this is good. And then after the first 5-year lease, they separated out the elk and deer hunting because they brought that out, deer and elk. People would pay $10,000 to shoot an elk from a pickup truck. Really? But anyway, I digress. But environmentalists got wind of